Have you ever felt a fear so deep that it lingers in your bones, even after waking up? I'm Nathan Graves, a paranormal investigator with years of experience, but nothing could prepare me for the horror I'm about to share with you. It started with a dream so vivid, so unnerving, that I could still feel its cold grip on my skin when I woke up. But this was no ordinary dream. This was a gateway to something far darker, something that crawled out of the shadows of my past and followed me into the waking world. The dream began innocently enough. I found myself standing on the edge of a river, its waters black as ink, silently moving under a thick blanket of fog. But there was something wrong about this river. The air around it was heavy, suffocating, like it was trying to draw me in. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to run, but my feet refused to move. I was paralyzed, a prisoner to the eerie pull of the place. And that's when I heard it. A low guttural whisper rising from the water, as if something unseen was calling out to me. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was lurking beneath the surface was waiting for me, watching me. Before we dive deeper into this nightmare, I need you to understand, what you're about to hear isn't just another ghost story. This is a warning. The things we see in our dreams sometimes spill over into reality, and when they do, they bring something with them. So if you're brave enough, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. But be careful, because once you open your mind to the darkness, it might never leave you. What I experienced in the Black River is something that still haunts me, and it may just find its way to you next. It started like any other night. Dark, silent, with the soft hum of the city fading into the background. But once I closed my eyes, the world around me changed. I found myself standing at the edge of a place that felt more like a forgotten memory than a dream. The river stretched out shorey, its waters impossibly black, reflecting nothing but the void of the sky. The fog clung to the surface like a living thing, curling and twisting as though it was alive, hiding whatever lurked beneath. The air was thick, filled with a stench I can only describe as rot, like the earth itself was decaying around me. It stung my nose, making it hard to breathe. I took a step forward, and the ground beneath my feet was soft, almost like walking on the spongy surface of a swamp. Each step produced a faint squelch, as if the earth was absorbing me, pulling me closer to the river's edge. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of water, but it wasn't the soothing rush of a stream. It was a slow, rhythmic sloshing, like something massive moving beneath the surface, disturbed by my presence. The deeper I ventured into the dream, the heavier the air became, as if the atmosphere itself was suffocating me. And then, there was the whisper. At first, it was barely audible, like a breeze stirring through the trees, but it grew louder, more insistent, echoing all around me. It wasn't in any language I recognized, yet the meaning was clear. It was calling me, luring me closer to the water. My heart pounded, and I felt a deep, primal fear take root in my chest, urging me to run. But I couldn't. My legs refused to move, as though the earth had cemented me in place. The whispering intensified, becoming more frantic, more desperate, as if warning me of something terrible that was about to happen. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught my eye. Something was shifting in the fog. It wasn't human. I could see the faint outline of a figure, its limbs unnaturally long, moving in the mist just beyond the water's edge. My breath hitched in my throat as the shadows seemed to dance and shift around it. The feeling of déjà vu washed over me. Somehow, deep down, I knew this place. But the question was how? How could I know this place that I had never been before? It felt like a forgotten nightmare from a past life, like a warning I had failed to heed. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a dream, it was a memory, and whatever was in that river was waiting for me. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now, and the figure in the mist began to move toward me. My feet felt like they were sinking, the earth beneath me turning to mud, gripping my ankles, pulling me down. The shadows thickened and the figure in the fog came closer. I could see it now, its eyes, or rather the absence of them. Black voids staring straight through me. My blood ran cold, and in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning of a much darker nightmare. As I stood frozen by the river, I could feel the weight of the shadows closing in around me. The figure in the mist was no longer a distant silhouette. It was near, almost tangible, and its presence was suffocating. My instincts screamed at me to move, to run, but something far more powerful held me in place. The fog seemed to thicken, swirling around me, wrapping me in its icy grip. Every breath I took felt like inhaling shards of glass, cold and sharp, as though the very air was trying to tear me apart from the inside. I forced myself to move, taking slow, deliberate steps away from the water's edge. My feet dragged through the mud, which now felt more like quicksand, pulling me down with every step. The sound of the river's slow, ominous sloshing seemed to follow me, echoing louder in the silence of the night. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see the figure behind me, but it had vanished into the mist. Yet I could still feel its eyes, or the absence of them, burning into the back of my skull. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, and with every step I took, the shadows seemed to stretch further, chasing me as if the darkness itself was alive. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted, and I stumbled into a clearing. The fog parted slightly, revealing a small dilapidated cabin just ahead. It looked ancient, as though it had been forgotten for centuries, with ivy and moss creeping up its crumbling walls. The windows were dark, but a faint, flickering light seeped out from under the door. My heart pounded in my chest, and against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I found myself drawn to it. There was something about that light, something unnatural, as if it was calling me, just like the whispering from the river. As I approached the cabin, the silence became oppressive. Even the distant sloshing of the river had ceased, replaced by a deafening stillness that made my skin crawl. My hand trembled as I reached for the door, which creaked open ever so slightly, revealing a sliver of the flickering light within. The smell hit me first, a thick, nauseating stench of rot and decay, far worse than anything I had encountered before. It clung to my throat, making it hard to breathe, and I had to fight the urge to retch. I stepped inside, and that's when I noticed the strange, impossible things around me. Objects on the shelves seemed to shift as soon as I looked away. A chair that was in the corner one moment appeared on the opposite side of the room the next. The air was thick with an eerie sense of déjà vu, as though I had been here before, though I couldn't explain how or why. But what truly unsettled me was the way the shadows moved on their own. They flickered and danced, stretching unnaturally, as if something unseen, was moving through them. And then I heard it again. The whisper, but this time, it wasn't coming from the river. It was coming from behind a door at the far end of the cabin, barely ajar, with a faint light leaking out. The same light I had seen before. My heart hammered in my chest as the whisper grew louder, more urgent, like a chorus of voices beckoning me to enter. But something in the pit of my stomach told me that once I opened that door, there would be no turning back. Summoning what little courage I had left, I pushed the door open. What lay beyond wasn't just a room. It was something far worse, something I could never have imagined. The figure from the mist stood there, waiting for me, its hollow eyes fixed on mine. But it was no longer Rodado. It was real, and as it stepped forward, I felt the weight of 1,000 nightmares crashing down upon me. As I stepped into the room, the temperature dropped so sharply that my breath crystallized in the air. The light flickered erratically, casting grotesque, shifting shadows across the walls. My gaze was immediately drawn to the center of the room, where an old, decrepit mirror stood. Its surface was cracked, with long, jagged lines spiderwebbing across the glass. But it wasn't the mirror itself that terrified me. It was what I saw reflected in it. Standing just behind me, where no one should have been, was the figure from the mist, Its hollow eyes locked onto mine through the fractured glass, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. I tried to turn, to confront whatever was there, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if I had been frozen in place, paralyzed by the weight of the darkness in that room. My throat tightened as I attempted to scream, but no sound came out. The figure in the mirror didn't move, yet its presence felt more real, more solid, as if it was seeping into my very soul. The light flickered again, and for a split second, the room plunged into complete darkness. When the light returned, the figure was no longer in the mirror. It was standing right in front of me. It wasn't human. Its body was twisted, the limbs too long, the skin stretched taut over its bones like it had been pulled from the depths of the earth itself. And those eyes. Those empty black voids seemed to swallow all the light in the room, leaving nothing but an abyss where its soul should have been. I could feel its breath, cold, damp, and reeking of decay, on my face. It raised a hand, its fingers elongated and ending in sharp, bony tips, and slowly reached toward me. I wanted to run, to escape, but my legs were rooted to the spot, as if the very floor had come alive to trap me there. As its hand inched closer, I felt an overwhelming dread wash over me, a certainty that once it touched me, I would be lost forever. But then, just as its fingers brushed against my skin, something snapped. A surge of instinct, pure survival, shot through me, and with all the strength I could muster, I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the nightmare to end. When I opened them again, I wasn't in the cabin anymore. I was in my bedroom, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I gasped for air, clutching at the bedsheets as if they were the only thing anchoring me to reality. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the digital clock on my bedside table. 3:33 a.m., the exact same time as the night before. My mind was racing, struggling to process what had just happened. It had felt so real, too real to be just a dream. But as I lay there, trying to calm my breathing, I heard it again. That same whisper, faint at first but growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't coming from the river this time. It was coming from inside my room. Slowly, I turned my head toward the source of the sound, and my blood ran cold. There, in the corner of my room, barely illuminated by the dim light of the clock, was the same figure from my dream. Its hollow eyes watched me, unblinking, as if it had followed me out of the nightmare and into the real world. I wanted to scream, but the sound died in my throat. I wanted to move, but my body refused to obey. The figure took a step forward, its limbs creaking and shifting in ways that no human body should. And as it moved closer, I realized that this wasn't just a nightmare anymore. Whatever had been waiting for me in that dream had found a way into my reality, and there was no waking up from this terror. The whispering grew louder, echoing inside my skull, filling my mind with a chorus of voices I couldn't understand. The figure was now only a few feet away, its cold, empty gaze piercing through me. And as I lay there, helpless, paralyzed by fear, I understood one thing with chilling clarity. The nightmare had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of confusion, fear, and sleepless nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back at the river, back in that cabin, staring into those soulless black eyes. But this time, it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a warning. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back from that nightmare, something that had crossed the boundary between dream and reality. And the more I thought about it, the more certain I became. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. Unable to ignore the mounting dread any longer, I started researching, hoping to find some explanation for what was happening to me. I combed through old books, obscure websites, and forgotten archives, searching for anything related to the Black River. What I found chilled me to the core. The river wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real. Hidden deep in the mountains, far from any town, it had been the site of countless disappearances over the centuries. Stories of people vanishing without a trace, All of them reported to have seen or dreamed about the river before they disappeared. As I dug deeper, I found something even more disturbing. The cabin from my dream, it existed too. Old records described an abandoned hunting lodge near the Black River, a place where strange and unexplainable phenomena had been reported for decades. People claimed to have seen figures in the mist, heard whispers in the night, and felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. The descriptions matched my dream perfectly, down to the rotting smell that lingered in the air. It was as if the dream had been a message, guiding me towards something far darker than I had ever imagined. But the worst discovery came when I stumbled upon a series of old newspaper clippings from the 1970s. They detailed a string of unsolved disappearances near the Black River, and one name stood out among the victims: Jonathan Graves. My father. He had gone missing when I was a child, and the case had never been solved. My mother had always told me he had left us, abandoning the family, but now I knew the truth. He had been drawn to the Black River just as I had, and whatever had taken him was now coming for me. My mind reeled as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The dreams, the figure, the whispers. It all connected back to my father's disappearance. I wasn't just dreaming about the Black River. I was being called to it, just like he had been. The realization sent a wave of terror crashing through me. If my father had been consumed by whatever darkness lurked there, then I was next. Desperate for answers, I decided to reach out to the locals near the Black River. I found a small, close-knit community that had lived in the shadow of the river for generations. When I asked them about the place, their faces grew pale, and they quickly changed the subject. It was clear they knew more than they were willing to share. But one man, an elderly resident named Henry, agreed to speak with me in private. He was the last remaining member of a family that had lived near the river for over a century, and what he told me made my blood run cold. Henry explained that the Black River was cursed, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was thin. According to local legend, the river had once been the site of an ancient ritual, a dark sacrifice meant to appease something that dwelled beneath the waters. But the ritual had gone horribly wrong, and ever since, the river had been a magnet for tragedy. Those who dreamt of it were said to be marked, chosen by the entity that haunted its depths. My father had been one of them, and now, it seemed, so was I. Every detail of my dream matched the stories Henry told me: the mist, the cabin, the figure in the shadows. He warned me that once the Black River had its sights set on you, there was no escaping it. It would haunt your dreams, invade your waking life, and eventually, it would claim you, just as it had claimed so many others. The symbol I had seen in the mirror, the one etched in my mind, was a mark of the river's claim on my soul. I left Henry's house with a deep, gnawing fear in my gut. The more I learned, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a nightmare. It was a curse, one that had been passed down to me through my father. And now, the same force that had taken him was coming for me, drawing me back to the Black River, to finish what had been started decades ago. With Henry's warning echoing in my mind, I knew there was no turning back. The Black River had marked me, just as it had marked my father, and I needed answers before it consumed me. The thought of returning to the place from my dreams filled me with dread, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the only way to break free was to face whatever was waiting for me in the shadows. I packed a bag, grabbed a flashlight, and set off on a journey I knew might be my last. The drive to the Black River was long and unsettling. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the roads became narrow, winding through thick, oppressive woods that blocked out the sunlight. The further I drove, the more isolated I felt. The trees seemed to close in around me, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands, scraping against the car windows as if trying to hold me back. It was as though the forest itself was alive, aware of my approach, and it didn't want me there. When I finally arrived at the river, the air was thick with an eerie silence. There were no birds, no insects, no signs of life at all, just the slow, rhythmic sound of the black water lapping against the shore. It was exactly as it had been in my dream, down to the rotting stench that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath my feet. The fog rolled across the surface of the river, moving with unnatural precision, as if it had a mind of its own. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to leave. But I was drawn forward by something I couldn't explain. I stepped out of the car, flashlight in hand, and made my way toward the old cabin. It looked even more decrepit in reality, its walls sagging under the weight of years, ivy and moss creeping over the rotting wood. The door hung crookedly on its hinges, creaking with every gust of wind, inviting me to enter. I hesitated for a moment, standing at the threshold, the memories of the dream flooding back. But I had to know the truth. I had to understand what had happened to my father, and what was happening to me. As I stepped inside, the temperature plummeted, just as it had in the dream. The same oppressive atmosphere filled the air, thick with the stench of decay. My flashlight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The interior of the cabin was exactly as I had seen it. Dust-covered furniture, broken glass, and the cracked mirror in the center of the room. But this time, there was something else. In the far corner, barely visible in the dim light, stood a figure. My breath caught in my throat as the figure stepped forward, revealing itself to be a man, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. It was Ethan, the same local man I had spoken to earlier. His face was pale, his expression twisted with fear and something else. Resignation. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Once you see it, there's no escape." He explained that he too had been drawn to the Black River by dreams, much like my own. He had tried to leave, to forget, but the river wouldn't let him. It had claimed him, just as it had claimed my father. And now it was my turn. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Whatever lurked beneath the river was real, and it was coming for both of us. Ethan told me about the others, the people who had disappeared, the ones who had tried to resist the pull of the river but failed. Their stories had all ended the same way, with them vanishing without a trace, leaving only whispers and legends behind. The river didn't just take them, it devoured them, body and soul. And now, it was calling me. Ethan urged me to leave before it was too late, but deep down, I knew there was no leaving. The Black River had its grip on me, and I couldn't escape its pull. With every step I took inside the cabin, the sense of being watched grew stronger. The shadows on the walls seemed to move on their own, twisting and stretching, as if something unseen was lurking just beyond the edge of the light. The whispering from the dream returned, faint at first, but growing louder, more insistent. It was coming from the river, calling me to its depths. I could feel its pull, like invisible hands dragging me toward the water's edge. Ethan grabbed my arm, his grip tight with desperation. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's already too late. The river, it knows you're here. It's been waiting for you." His words sent a chill down my spine, and I realized then that the nightmare wasn't just in my head. It was real, and it was happening right now. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, and the fog outside the cabin thickened, swirling like a vortex. Something was coming, and I knew that whatever it was, it wouldn't stop until it had claimed me. I turned toward the door, but it slammed shut with a force that shook the entire cabin. The shadows closed in, the whispering intensified, and I knew that the Black River had come to collect what it was owed. I wasn't just a visitor here, I was its next victim. As the cabin door slammed shut, the whispering around me rose to a deafening pitch, as if the very air was alive with voices. Shadows twisted and writhed along the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost human, but were far too grotesque to be real. Ethan stood frozen beside me, his eyes wide with terror, his body trembling as the room grew colder, darker. Whatever was coming for us was no longer lurking in the fog. It was here, and it wanted something from us both. I backed away, my flashlight flickering wildly as I searched for any escape, but the room itself seemed to be closing in, the walls narrowing, the shadows creeping closer. Then, in the center of the room, the cracked mirror began to shimmer, its fractured surface distorting the reflections of the room around it. I felt a sickening pull in my gut, a sensation like falling, though my feet remained firmly planted on the ground. The mirror wasn't just reflecting, it was calling. Suddenly, the figure from my dreams emerged from the shadows, standing directly in front of the mirror. Its appearance was even more horrific up close, with skin stretched tight over its skeletal frame and those empty black voids where its eyes should have been. It reached out a long, twisted hand, pointing toward the mirror, its mouth opening in a silent scream that echoed in my mind. The air around me grew impossibly cold, and my breath fogged in front of me as if I were standing in a frozen tomb. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. The figure was drawing me in, beckoning me toward the mirror with a force I couldn't resist. Ethan shouted my name, his voice breaking through the fog of fear that had enveloped me. He grabbed my arm, pulling me back, but the force from the mirror was too strong. It was as though something from the other side was trying to drag me through, to pull me into whatever nightmare realm existed beyond the glass. The whispers grew louder, almost unbearable, and I felt a presence behind me, a dark, suffocating force that pressed against my back, pushing me toward the mirror. In a moment of pure terror, I realized what the mirror was. It wasn't just an object. It was a gateway, a portal between this world and something far darker, something that had been waiting for me, waiting for anyone who dared come too close to the Black River. The figure in the mirror was just the beginning, a manifestation of whatever entity controlled the river's cursed waters. And now it wanted to claim me, just as it had claimed my father. The mirror's pull grew stronger, and I found myself standing directly in front of it, staring into the fractured reflection of my own face. But it wasn't just my reflection staring back at me. There, in the broken shards of glass, I saw my father. His face, gaunt and hollow, his eyes filled with a sorrow and fear I had never seen before. He was trapped on the other side, reaching out to me, his lips moving but no sound escaping. He was warning me, pleading with me not to follow, but it was too late. The darkness had already claimed him, and now it was reaching for me. A cold hand brushed against my shoulder, and I turned to see the figure from my dreams, now more real than ever. Its fingers, long and bony, wrapped around my arm, pulling me closer to the mirror. Ethan screamed at me to fight, to resist, but my body felt weak, my mind fogged by the sheer terror of what was happening. I was being dragged into the mirror, into the same fate that had taken my father all those years ago. And then I saw it, the symbol. The same symbol from my dream, etched into the mirror's surface, glowing faintly in the darkness. It was the mark of the Black River, the curse that had been passed down to me through my bloodline. I knew that touching it would seal my fate, that once I crossed the threshold, there would be no coming back. But I had no choice. The entity behind the mirror was pulling me in, and I could feel my grip on reality slipping away. Just as my hand brushed the surface of the mirror, I felt a surge of cold wash over me, and everything went black. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no light, no sensation. Just a void, endless and empty. And then I opened my eyes. I was no longer in the cabin. I was lying on the cold, damp ground by the river, my clothes soaked with the mist that clung to the air. The whispers were gone, the fog had lifted, and the mirror was nowhere to be seen. I was alone, but something was different. The presence, the dark force that had been following me. It was still there, lingering just out of sight. I could feel it, watching, waiting. Ethan was gone, vanished without a trace, just like the others before him. The Black River had claimed him, and though I had escaped, I knew it wasn't finished with me. The symbol was still burned into my mind, a reminder that the nightmare wasn't over. The river had let me go, for now, but I knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before it came for me again. The choice had been made, the mark had been left, and now I was bound to the Black River's curse. It was only a matter of time before the shadows returned, before the whispers found me again. And next time, I might not be so lucky. I woke up in a hospital bed, disoriented and confused. The sterile white walls and the faint beeping of machines surrounded me, but none of it felt real. My mind was still trapped in the nightmare of the Black River, the echoes of the whispers still ringing in my ears. The doctors told me I'd been found unconscious near the river, my body cold and unresponsive, but they had no explanation for what had happened to me. No injuries, no trauma, just a blank space where my memory should have been. They asked me if I remembered anything, but how could I explain what I had seen? How could I tell them about the figure, the mirror, and the void that had swallowed me whole? The truth was, I didn't fully understand it myself. It felt like I had crossed into another world, a world that existed just beyond the surface of our own. And though I had made it back, something had followed me. The presence that had haunted me in the dream, that had pulled me toward the mirror, was still with me. I could feel it, lurking in the corners of the room, watching me. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound seemed more distant. It was as if the boundary between the real world and the nightmare had been permanently blurred. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. The symbol from the mirror, the mark of the Black River, began to appear in the most unexpected places. I would catch glimpses of it out of the corner of my eye, etched into the frost on my bathroom mirror, or scrawled in the dirt on my car's windshield. It was as if the river was reminding me that it wasn't done with me, that the nightmare was far from over. Each time I saw the symbol, I felt the same cold, sinking dread that I had felt by the river's edge. And I knew that whatever had claimed my father was still coming for me. The dreams returned too, more vivid than ever. Every night I found myself back at the Black River, standing on the banks, as the mist rolled across the water. The figure was always there, watching from the shadows, its hollow eyes fixed on me. The whispers called out to me, louder and more insistent, and I could feel the pull of the mirror, drawing me back into the darkness. Each morning I would wake in a cold sweat, the sensation of the river's icy water still clinging to my skin. But the worst part was that the dreams no longer felt like dreams. They felt like memories, as if I was living the same moment over and over again. One night as I lay awake, unable to sleep, I heard a familiar sound, the same low, guttural whisper from the river, but this time it wasn't coming from my dreams. It was real, echoing through the darkened halls of my house. My blood ran cold as I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, and it was coming from just outside my bedroom door. I reached for the lamp on my bedside table, but the light wouldn't turn on. The darkness seemed to press in around me, and I realized with growing terror that the river had found me. It wasn't just in my dreams anymore. It had crossed into my world. Slowly I got out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I opened the door, and there it was, the figure, standing at the end of the hallway, bathed in shadows. Its eyes, those same hollow voids, stared at me, unblinking. The air grew cold, and the whispering filled my ears, louder than ever before. It was the same voice I had heard by the river, the same voice that had called to me in the mirror. And now, it was here. I tried to speak, to ask what it wanted from me, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure took a step forward, and the floorboards creaked under its weight. I backed away, my pulse racing, but there was nowhere to go. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer, darker. The figure raised its hand, and for a brief moment, I saw the mark of the Black River etched into its skin, the same symbol that had haunted me since the nightmare began. It was a part of me now, just as it was a part of the river. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone.